Next part of ecosystem. The ecosystem has been a key organizational concept in ecology for many years, an important theoretical and applied concept for studying global change, the human environmental impacts. The ecosystem concept has provided an conceptual framework for studying nature and for sustainable management of natural resources. Ecosystem concept has proved to be of practical value to understand the complexity of natural systems and ecosystem properties. A lake, an island, or a watershed are good examples of ecosystem in the context of systems theory of ecosystem analysis. A.G. Tansley, a British ecologist, defined an ecosystem as a basic unit of nature composed of the set of organisms and physical factors forming the environment. Ronald Linneman, while working on the Cedar Bog Lake in Minnesota, USA, gave the trophic dynamic concept in 1942 and popularized the idea of the ecosystem as an energy transforming system. E.P. Odom has been one of the most influential ecologists of the 20th century, laid foundations of the concept of ecosystem in ecological studies. It has been defined as a basic functional unit of nature which includes organisms and their non-living environment, each interacting with the other and influencing each other's properties and both necessary for maintenance and development of system. A more elaborate definition according to Odom in 1971 is the structure and functional unit of nature that includes all of the organisms, the community in a given area interacting with the physical environment so that a flow of energy leads to clearly defined trophical structure, biotic diversity and material cycles. According to the CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity, an ecosystem is a dynamic complex of plant, animals, and microorganism communities and their non-living environment, interacting as a functional unit, an integral component of which are humans. In all definitions, the concept of interacting functional unit in which living and non-living components of the ecosystem are variously coupled is emphasized. Associated with the concept of ecosystem are those of structure and ecosystem functioning. Structure is related to the organization and distribution of elements within an ecosystem. Ecosystem functioning are related to the exchange of materials and the flow of energy in an ecosystem. Ecosystem components and structure. The ecosystem has two major kinds of components like abiotic non-living, biotic living components. Abiotic components. The abiotic structure is characterized by the quantity and distribution of non-living materials, edaphic factors and the climate regime, light, rainfall and temperature. The inorganic substances are carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, CO2 and water which are present in soil, water and air. The atmosphere supplies carbon and nitrogen, whereas soil minerals and dissolved nutrients in water are a source of nutrients required by living organisms. The organic compounds such as proteins, carbohydrates, lipids and other complex molecules form a link between biotic and abiotic components of the system. The climatic factors like solar radiation and temperature determine the abiotic conditions with which organisms carry out their life conditions. Soil is a medium of plant growth representing a mixture of minerals and organic materials capable of supplying all the essential nutrients and water. Then biotic components. The organisms that make up the living part of the ecosystem biotic community are divisible into two major categories like autotrophs, producers and heterotrophs, consumers. This division is based on the function of the organism. Autotrophs. These are the chlorophyll bearing organisms which produce their own food by assimilating the solar energy and making use of simple inorganic abiotic substances. In terrestrial ecosystem, the autotrophs are generally rooted plants, herbs, shrubs and trees. In open water such as deep aquatic ecosystems and oceans, the dominant producers are phytoplanktons, which is mostly microscopic organisms that float or drift in the water. In freshwater and marine ecosystems, algae and plants are the major producers near shorelines. The heterotrophs are the organisms which cannot manufacture their own food. The heterotrophs are of two types, like the phagotrophs or macro consumers. The macro consumers include mainly animals that ingest other organisms or particulate organic matter, snail that ingest organic particles. The food of consumers consists of organic compounds produced by other living organisms. The phagotrophs may be herbivorous, ingesting plants, goat, deer, or carnivorous, ingesting other animals. Lion, tiger, omnivores, ingesting both plants and animals. Bear man, a primary consumer that derives nutrition by eating plants, is an herbivore. The secondary consumer or carnivore is an animal that preys upon an herbivore of other animals. Then micro-consumers or saprotrophs. The saprotrophs are certain types of bacteria and fungi. These are also called decomposers, which break down complex dead organic matter into simple inorganic forms, absorb some of the decomposed products, and release inorganic nutrients that are used by the producers. We can see a schematic representation of an ecosystem showing abiotic and biotic components. The dashed lines represent the boundary of the ecosystem. Here you can see a boundary which is drawn with the help of dashed lines. Into that we can see some other portions called solar radiation. Into the producers, plant photoplankton, plant respiration, herbivores, carnivores, respiration will be taking place, animal emigration reactions, decomposers, heterotrophs, fungi, bacteria, available nutrients, soil, water, air, nutrient input, leaching or excretion, nutrient output, etc. all take place here. Next, ecosystem components, abiotic components, biotic components, autotrophs, heterotrophs, saprotrophs, phagotrophs. Okay. Climate regime, light, rainfall, temperature, edaphic factor, soil, minerals, topography. Ecosystem components, abiotic components, and biotic components. In case of biotic components, we have autotrophs and heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are further divided into saprotrophs and phagotrophs. Then abiotic components are of two types, like climatic regime, edaphic factors. Edaphic means soil related. So climatic factors are light, rainfall, temperature. Edaphic factors, soil, minerals, and topography. Ecosystem structure. Ecosystem structure is a network of interactions between abiotic and biotic components of the system. The biotic structure of the ecosystem is characterized by the composition of the biological community, including species numbers, biomass, life form, life history, and spatial distribution of species. Species diversity at the level of autotrophs, macro consumers, and decomposers is an important structural characteristic of the ecosystem. The ecosystem level diversity refers to the complexity. Next, ecosystem boundary. In some cases, the boundaries of the ecosystem are reasonably apparent, as it is in the case of a pond or a lake. The pond or lake also is always associated with the catchment or watershed from which it receives the inflow of water as well as a variety of inorganic and organic substances. The existence of the lake depends on its watershed. The entire drainage basin, lake press watershed, may be considered as a single ecosystem. Traditionally, Earth's ecosystem have been divided into categories for comparing their structure and function. Investigators often define a boundary around an area to delimit a locale in which to study an ecosystem. For example, it could be the small watershed ecosystem that is useful to quantify inflows and outflows of water and dissolved elements. A watershed is the entire drainage of a stream or river from which all the surface water and groundwater leave at a single point. Watersheds have been used by scientists for measuring the input of rainwater collected at various locations within the watersheds and output in the streams that drain them. The watershed approach has been used by the ecologists at Hubbard Brook Forests of New Hampshire, a pioneering study to analyze nutrient cycling and regeneration processes for understanding how ecosystem functions. Acts. Ecosystem functions. The green plants capture the solar energy and convert it through the process of photosynthesis into chemical energy of food and store it into their body. This process is called primary productivity, the rate of total capture of energy or total organic matter production by autotrophs. Primary produce is known as gross primary production. The rate of total capture of energy or total organic matter production by autotrophs, primary producers, is known as gross primary production. The autotrophs use some of the energy they require for respiration. The remainder is the net primary production, the amount of energy left for the heterotrophic organisms. Net primary productivity, the amount of energy left for the heterotrophic organisms. The energy is lost from the ecosystem when organic matter is oxidized back to CO2 by the respiration of autotrophs and heterotrophs. At the trophic level of heterotrophs, the rate of assimilation of energy is called secondary productivity. Producers, photosynthesis, energy flow, nutrient cycling. Diagram showing unidirectional flow of energy and nutrient cycling in an ecosystem. Primary productivity on land increases from polar regions to the equator, except for the intervening strongly water-limited deserts. The greater productivity of tropical regions to a greater extent is due to the favorable combination of high incident solar radiation, warm temperature, abundant rainfall, and a high biological diversity. These factors result in a longer, almost year-round growing season. Aquatic gross primary production depends on the quantity of phytoplankton and the vertical profile of light and other physical factors. Microscopic phytoplankton living in oceans are responsible for more than 40% of Earth's photosynthetic production, but the ecosystem with the greatest net primary production per unit area is the tropical rainforest. So, ecosystem with the greatest net primary production is the tropical rainforest. Biogeochemical cycling. These we have already learned during our previous session, so I will be skipping these portions. So a new point is the food web. So there are various hypotheses relating to food chain length, like the energy limitation hypothesis, the dynamic stability hypothesis, the optimal foraging hypothesis, the design constraint hypothesis. In addition, studies from both aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems suggest that food chain length is positively correlated with habitat area, suggesting another possible determinant of food chain length. Ecosystem development, the gradual change in species composition. So 4 theories are there. Which are they? The energy limitation hypothesis, the dynamic stability hypothesis, the optimal foraging hypothesis, the design constraint hypothesis. The gradual change in species composition and processes of communities over time. The gradual change in species composition and process of communities over time is known as ecological succession. So we mentioned another term called cybernetic system. In open system, where some of the output information may be feedback as input to control the functioning, is called a cybernetic system. Feedback mechanisms. Positive feedback, increased output results in increased input and therefore in further increased output, and so on. Reproduction is an example of positive feedback. Positive feedback, births increase population size, which in turn increase the rate of reproduction, which leads to yet more birth. Negative feedback is one of the principal mechanisms of homeostasis. So The maintenance of dynamic equilibrium by internal regulation. This decreases the amount of change and leads to stability and the state of dynamic equilibrium. Predator-prey systems are example of negative feedback. Consumption of prey by a predator, for example, has a positive effect on the consumer but a negative effect on the prey. Here we can see the negative feedback loop and the cybernetic system. Here you can see another two important terms like resilience and resistance, which we have already learned during our previous classes. Ecosystem function and time graph. We can see perturbation, normal operating range, total stability, resilience stability, resistance stability. And this picture indicates how human impacts are also present in between these. Ecosystems, natural capital, socio-economic system, human-made capital, ecosystem services, natural resources, and global cycles, sun energy, human impacts. The relationship of natural ecosystems and human system. The global cycles are the hydrological and geochemical cycles. There are close scale interactions between various flows, natural resources, and ecosystem services. Thank you for listening.